Dungeons & Dragons flirts with Eldritch horror. But is it any good? I'm Brad Wolf, and welcome to Diredan, and this is a first look at Phandelver and Below the Shattered Obelisk, the new adventure for Dungeons & Dragons from Wizards of the Coast. And in interest of full disclosure, I purchased this myself. This was not given to me as a review copy, and I'm not getting paid to do a review. I pre-ordered the digital and physical bundle so I would get it 2 weeks early in order to do this review. And in fact, this is more than just a review. I also am going to give you my thoughts on how I would run this and what I would adapt or adjust in order to make it run even smoother. And hopefully that helps you determine if you want to purchase this and if you want to run it for your group. I have no plans to review every book that WotC makes. However, this one did catch my attention, and WotC did a lot more to advertise Shattered Obelisk than they did both Keys for the Golden Vault and Dragonlance put together. The hype on this one was definitely greater than Spelljammer and greater than Radiant Citadel. And I think this means that WotC believes in this product more than they have their other releases. And all that added up to me making this review. Now, there will be some spoilers here, nothing too drastic, but if you're a player who wants to go into this completely unaware, then stop now, but send this to your friend who will DM it for you. That way they can be prepared to give you the best game they can. Now let's take a look at all this. Now the first thing I want to say here is this is not your mother's Phandelver. The later chapters definitely take this adventure in the direction of Eldritch horror, which of course includes a sense of dread and body horror. So if you and your players aren't cool with those two topics, this might not be the adventure for you. Now if you are cool with these topics, this would be the perfect adventure to start running as soon as possible so that you hit the Eldritch horror chapters right around Halloween. Now, as you probably already know or just figured out from the name, this is a reimagining of the starter box adventure Lost Minds of Phandelver. So the first 4 chapters are not new. They are essentially the same adventure. There are some changes, and we'll take a look at those now. The first one being the art got a serious upgrade, and they included new art for several of the NPCs that you didn't get to see in the original Phandelver adventure. Now, with that extra attention to the art, they also switched the gender of one of the NPCs and the race of one of the NPCs from half-elf to drow. The latter of which I'm assuming is because they've taken the half-elf out of the new version of the game. So that makes sense for a switch there. I'm not really sure why they would change the gender of an NPC other than they just had art that they wanted to use, because there's plenty of female characters in the original adventure, and I don't see any other story reason to change the gender of the character. The third thing is they have made it more challenging. After all, the original Phandelver adventure was a starter adventure, so it makes sense that they dialed up the difficulty level here. I noticed at least 2 examples where the former adventure had 3 skeletons and the new adventure has 6 skeletons. The other example is a wraith that was customized down to a challenge rating 3 and is now replaced with the regular wraith stat block from the monster manual, which is a challenge rating 5. But again, they upgraded the art. So they move away from the custom stat block with standard monster manual art to the standard monster manual stat block but custom art. This makes the wraith NPC cooler looking and tougher. Not a bad upgrade. Now you may have heard about this already, but they added some extra goblins to the first half of the adventure that weren't there in the original Phandelver version. Now these goblins have crystals that grow out of their backs or out of their foreheads, and they have psychic powers. So that's something that as a DM you're going to want to draw attention to, that there's these 2 different types of goblins. The Cragmaw goblins that are part of the original story, and these other psychic goblins that are distinctly different. That way you're foreshadowing the second half of the adventure during the first half of the adventure. The other thing I want to do is show off some of the cool monsters that you get in the second half of this adventure. Like this Grick, who grows crystals on its back to blend in with the Eldritch crystals that are growing in its environment. And there are a number of other upgraded monsters, particularly aberrations, that give you that creepy Eldritch horror far realm feel. Like this flesh meld that's just plain gross. and the intellect snare that has an ability called Cacophony of Mind. Not to mention the oculorb that looks like a melted beholder. And this encephalon cluster. It's essentially a giant egg sac cluster that spawns these floating arboreal leeches that attach to you and suck your blood. Even mind flayers are scared of these things because they can take over a colony like a virus. Now, I don't want to give too many more spoilers, but I will say that this adventure delves into the Far Realm, which is Dungeons & Dragons' alternate plane of existence that's full of aberrations that can cook your brain. And this adventure does an interesting take on it, as large chunks of brain matter make up several of the adventure locations that are made out of this twisted gray-pink tissue. It's delightfully gross, my favorite one being the Wall of Hubris, which is the remains of 5 wizards who thought they could siphon power from the Far Realm, and now what's left of their essence is trapped here in this Cthulhu-like dimension of horrors. Now let's get into the adjustments that I think should be made here. The first thing I would do, have a strong session 0 where you clarify with the players that it's okay to introduce the idea of body horror and that their player characters might actually suffer from some of those body horror transformations. There's actually a random mutation table that you can roll on. This will help the players become more invested because they want to deal with the strange maladies that their player characters are suffering from. Now, when you defeat the villain at the end of Chapter 4, there's not a lot of strong connections to draw the players back to Phandelver. So I think you need to do some good groundwork during the first 2 chapters, really establishing a connection in between your players and the village. And the way to do that is to get the player characters invested in the NPCs. I think it'll be really important to spend some time role-playing the different NPCs so that your players find the ones that are their favorites and then connect those favorites to other plot hooks. In fact, I would borrow some adventures from ICRPG to give the players more things to do in and around Phandelver, and when they complete those adventures, have the townspeople of Phandelver react very favorably to them, maybe even giving them gifts and treating them like good friends. This will not only help your players feel like heroes, but it'll help the player characters become more invested in the town itself and the people of the town. Now, take a look at this cow and see how it's mutated. This is art from the book, and I think it's hilarious. But this is exactly the kind of thing I would play up even more. As the players venture out into the wilderness, I would have strange mutations affecting both the environment and the wildlife. That way, even early on, the players get a sense that there's something bizarre going on in the Phandelver area. Now, the main villains are trying to corrupt the humans in Phandelver. One way to explain why it's taking longer to corrupt the humans is humanity itself. That the collection of humanity going to the town, being around other people, actually helps the group resist the strange eldritch magic that is corrupting the area. So this could explain why the wilderness surrounding Phandelver is getting affected first. But then as the players take multiple return trips back to Phandelver, they will notice the growing corruption affecting the villagers. And if you've done a good job building connections between the player characters and the NPCs, then the players will see this corruption as affecting their friends, and they'll want to protect their friends as well as themselves, and that should help drive the plot forward. One of the other things I would do is introduce the character Gwen or Song early on as well. Now, she appears later in the story, and when she does, she has a lot of useful information to offer the players. But I would introduce her earlier in the adventure, at least by name. That way the players hear about her by reputation before they actually meet her, so they're more likely to trust her and make sure that they actually pay attention to her when she appears and has information to offer. But overall, I think you get my point. What's going to make this a really strong adventure is the work you do connecting the 2 halves. Because at the end of the day, this is an old adventure that's been remastered, and then it had a new story tacked on to the end of it. For it to not feel like 2 disparate things, you need to work it a little bit to mix the 2 halves together for a more cohesive story. And ultimately, that's the thing that prevents a good adventure from being a great adventure here, and that's my ultimate review. This is a good adventure, and with the right amount of work from you as a DM, it could be a great adventure. Now, you can probably tell from my voice that I do like this adventure, The Eldritch horror elements are fresh and different and not like too many things we've seen before. However, the first half is a remake of an adventure that a lot of people have already played. So you're really only getting 4 chapters of new content. But if you've recently run Lost Mines of Phandelver, you could just transition straight to the second half of this, since your players are already familiar with that. Or if you ran Lost Mines of Phandelver a long time ago, and you don't want to replay it, you could always use the Dragon of Icespire Peak, because it also takes place in Phandelin. And you could run that adventure up to level 5, and then run the second half of this new adventure. And it would work the same way. You would start in Phandelin, get to know the NPCs, get to know the town, and then see it transform into this Eldritch abomination. Now, one other thing that is a little bit of a disappointment. We don't find out the full story behind these obelisks that have appeared in multiple other adventures. You just find out the secret behind this particular one. Now, there is a connection to these obelisks and Vecna, so we might find that the upcoming Vecna adventure that Wizards of the Coast has alluded to will give us more answers on these obelisks. So to recap, I like the new art, I like the new monsters, I like that they raised the difficulty level, I also like the Eldritch horror elements in the second half of the adventure. So again, even if you've already run Phandelver, I would still recommend the second half of this if you're willing to spend the money on it. Now, me personally, I am going to run this adventure, but I'm going to do it as part of a larger sandbox that includes Sunless Citadel, Forge of Fury, and Dragon of Icespire Peak. Now, if you want to know how I plan to combine all of those adventures into that sandbox, let me know in the comments below, and I'll do a video, or maybe a series of videos, on building that campaign. But until next time, thanks for watching, and thanks for being a part of the Dire Den.